Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Liberation Podcast. Today we'll be discussing, analyzing, and reviewing The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. Mariah and I have adopted a Palestinian family that is currently still stuck in Gaza. Muhammad's neighborhood was bombed and killed 22 members of his family, leaving him responsible for his 4 younger siblings who were pulled from the rubble. Via their family's GoFundMe, linked in the description, and they are very close to their goal. Please donate below. For more content outside of the podcast, please check our Instagram, TikTok at Literary Liberation, and Twitter at LitLibPodcast. I'm your co-host Kristen. You can find me at KRXXTXN on all social media platforms.
And I'm your co-host Mariah, and you can find me at Hungry Mariah on all social media platforms.
Mariah's lighting is buck wild bananas today, by the way, y'all. So
I know I'm sitting in the sunshine, so I'm trying to lean back a little bit if anyone is watching. If you don't know, this is our first episode reviewing a book that we did with our book club, which was pretty cool.
Yes, this was the first book that we did on the book club over on Fable, which we will have linked below if you want to sign up. And we will talk, I'm sure, later in the episode what next month's book will be. So if you want to join that. But I guess we could probably talk a little bit about how the book club worked for this. I didn't chat much in it.
Yeah, Kristen is not a book club person. I think that's the problem with why you can't pace out your books like that. You like to do it right before you film your subjects.
Yeah.
That week before you read one book at a time. You're not usually reading things in the background in the same way that I and some other people do, where I got 5 to 10 books going at the same time, like a freak.
Yeah, typically I'm reading one book at a time. But the thing is as well, I also didn't like this book that much. Spoiler alert for later on. And so I didn't want to be like a Debbie Downer in the chat. So I was not saying that much at all.
So this episode will probably be similar to The Will of the Many, in which we both had very different tastes with the book, but we can get into what the book is about and whatnot first. Stay in the spoil-free zone before we move on.
So I guess what this book is about, if you haven't heard about it, which I hadn't really heard about it either until I guess other left-wing people were like, oh, you should read this to Mariah, and Mariah told me about it. I was like, sounds interesting enough, where it's just basically about a guy named Shevek who lives on this moon, who is a physicist or whatever, and ultimately he decides to leave the moon, which you don't really know why until literally the second to last chapter of the book. Pretty much. But you basically just follow this guy named Shevek, who is basically from a communist anarchist moon called Anares. Our pronunciations will probably not be very good this episode either. But he basically leaves this moon to go live on a different moon, its sister moon called Uraris or something. And he basically goes there and lives on this capitalist moon to try to share his theories about time travel, basically, that he has, I would say.
Much. And it's a lot.
It's not a plot book.
Classic. It's very. I mean, there is plot. This is where Chris and I will disagree. It is a character-heavy book, but it is exploring, because it is speculative science fiction. Kind of the differences between a highest phase communist society and a super capitalist society, right? Insert general. It is not necessarily the U.S., but there is a lot of parallels that are drawn between the U.S. And there isn't a one-to-one reflection of what Anares would be, because nothing like that has ever existed. So this is kind of
wonder why.
I don't know. Anyways, so we'll talk about it. But that's what it is. This is a very politics first book. If you like politics, this will be it. But we can get into who the author is, because she's published a lot of stuff. I think a lot of people know the Earthsea cycle series, a Wizard of Earthsea's one, because Studio Ghibli made a movie about the series. Yeah. So there's that. People love the book or that book series and that movie for different reasons, and people say you can enjoy them both interchangeably, which I think is really cool. I think it's kind of like a house moving castle situation, so I don't really know. I also haven't watched it because I haven't read the series. I was waiting for Kristen because I think Kristen would eat it up. I started reading it and it's like right up Kristen's alley.
Hopefully better than this one.
With the magic the magic system in it, and that's the one she's most known for. She has another book that's similar to this that explores like gender, which is like the left hand of darkness. And then like the dispossessed and the telling are her two big like political themed. I think they're both science fiction. So there is not a lot on her actual politics. I did look up as much as I could about things that she said. Some things are a little off because she didn't necessarily like prescribe to a certain philosophical framework or economic framework. She was really influenced by like Bookchin, sorry, not Bakunin, and then Kropotkin, which I think is kind of evident. You can see that a lot in this book. She's very inspired by Peter Kropotkin. Sorry. What else? What does there say? This book has won many not rewards, awards. Since it's come out, it like the first year it came out, it won a Nebula Award. I don't keep up with book awards or what they mean, so I apologize for that. So I can't give you a lot of insight, but there is several awards that this book has won, which has earned its place as a classic, I guess. I don't really know what determines something as a classic.
I thought it was just age, to be honest.
Yeah, it must be, but not all books are classics, are they? Like there
I
has to
think
be
if they're an
some.
old book, they're considered a classic.
But there's
But
old books that aren't like classics. You know what I
but
mean?
just I think they're still considered classics. They're just not popular.
No, I don't know what makes something. I think
Are you
one
googling it?
part of it has to be like timeless.
I think it's probably like age and then relevancy to now. But I don't
Yeah,
know if
that's what I
that's
mean.
even
Like
true.
you can reconceptualize it for like the modern day. Like some things won't like age well.
What?
A classic. Yeah, something of lasting worth or with timeless quality, allegedly. This was a very simple. Hopefully, that wasn't like an AI search result, but that's just
If
what
you
came up.
type minus AI, it won't pop up
I know.
an
I need to
AI.
start doing that. I'm doing it one
Anyways,
handed. I got my mic in one hand. Let's
um,
see. She didn't really have a lot of like controversies in the same like way that I guess modern because this is older.
and she's
She
dead.
just and she is dead. Goodreads popularity because, you know, why not review things within the context and whether or not they're of value based on what they get on Goodreads. 4.25 stars with 135,000 reviews and 11K ratings. So, I don't think we can talk about any of the reviews until we get to the spoiler zone. I actually don't know what Kristen ended up rating this, like your non spoiler review.
I gave it 2.75 stars because I thought it was very dry. It was very boring. It was not something that I was drawn to pick up because I did end up reading something else in between me reading this because I realized I could not have this be the only book I was reading because it is so, for lack of a better term, boring. Like, if you like very heavily, like, there's virtually, like, yes, there's a plot, but the plot is so irrelevant because you're following one character throughout the entire book and his reaction to things happening around him. It's very much like, not like saying that it's like Bunny, but the way that the main character is in Bunny is much like how the main character of the Dispossessed Shevek is. And I did not enjoy that main character in any way whenever I read Bunny. And even whenever I'm reading like a book like this, I don't enjoy the main character that way either. It doesn't matter if it's science fiction, lit fic, whatever. If the character is not something that I feel like, not even that I can like necessarily like connect with, if I'm not finding their story interesting or drawing to it, I will not be into it. And it's very dry. Like, if you like a whole lot of story that is like virtually emotionless, I would say there's practically no emotion shown in the writing. You can't really connect with the writing. It feels like you're reading a textbook about the history of these two, like,
We
moons.
do need to establish that you do not enjoy reading classics, and I don't think you enjoy reading science fiction. Like, these are two very
I mean, I have
relevant
never
things.
read science fiction really. Like this is probably like the first like true like science fiction only novel that I've ever read. Just because I'm typically more drawn to fantasy elements than I am drawn to science fiction. Where I'm not saying I don't like science fiction, I don't know because I've never read it. And if this is how all science fiction is, then yeah, I probably would not like that genre.
No, I don't think this is a depiction on how, like, science fiction as a genre is, but it is, like, I don't know, it's more because it is technically, like, science fiction, but it's not science fiction in the way that, say, I don't know, Ice Planet Barbarians or something that's more of, like, a space
Okay, I wouldn't like
opera.
that science fiction either. I can tell you that right now. But like,
That's
I
what I
don't
think.
know.
I don't think you like space, and this is also, like,
I don't think
speculative
that's
fiction.
necessarily
This is
true.
not, um it's hard to explain this book without, like, talking about it, but it is very nuanced, and a lot of things have double meanings when you are reading them. It's not you're not just gonna read the words, you actually have to, like, think about what they're saying. I rated it 5 star, by the way, so this will be an episode.
But Mariah gave it 5 stars, but I'm telling you, the first like 5 chapters, Mariah didn't know what was going on either, and we got into serious debates about what was going on.
I knew what was happening. I'm gonna preface this because we got in a debate because Kristen was convinced that things were happening in different places, and I was like, no, this was like a whole thing. Kristen confused me. I was right the whole
You
time. It
were
all
not right
made
because you
sense.
were saying Uranus was a communist planet that was a part of the communists, and I
No,
said no,
I
it is not.
conflated the two planets. I thought Eurus was like the one, but it was in Aries, and that was my fault when we had the discussion. However, the overall principle of each chapter having its own thing, it was good until we had that discussion. You were confused where the mom was, right?
Yes,
But
that's
without
one
getting to
section,
which
but
we can get into. That was the only time in which I
that
was
was
confused. The rest of
because
the
the
time, I was
chapter
fine.
at the top said that he was on Uranus. For my copy, for the digital copy that I had, it did not say that it was both. It did not have both moons listed.
It wasn't both moons. They were only on
No,
an
there was
Aries.
a
And I
point
double
where
checked my copy and I double checked the physical copy, and they all said the same thing.
I didn't
And I know
double check.
exactly which chapter it is because I took notes. I have 13 pages of notes. So don't I was like, I checked. It all tracks. It was chapter 6.
I said chapter 5, my mistake. But other
It was
than that,
chapter
like,
5 was, but that was the only time I was confused. I was like, I was locked in. I do read um books like this though. Like, I started getting into, like, classics and whatnot last year, like, very un not officially,
passively.
but, like, passively getting into it. So, and then this year I think I'm gonna eat it up because, like, I finished 2024 with Steven Zweig's chess, and it exceeded my expectations.
Why do you
And
have so many books right next to you? What are you doing?
me
Yes,
the
why?
because I'm posting that on Zhao Hongshu. Like, I was gonna talk about my books, but that's besides the point. Anyways, we can get into the rest of the episode. This is all, but I will say, I do think this is a 5 star book. I do like the commentary. I think the politics of this are better than any that I have ever read. That being said, this is not a book that's going to be for everyone. I think this is a really good book if you like nonfiction and you read exclusively nonfiction and you're trying to get into fiction. This would be that book. That's what I think. This would be like the point. And I do think there is good things of value, like left-wing fiction as a whole, but I do not think you should take this book for theory, which I don't know why some anarchists are doing that. I think that's very strange.
And
Because
that's,
this
I think
should
that's very
only be
telling
for a philosophical idea, and that's why we're
for
here
like a discussion. I think I
discussing.
can understand like the discussion aspect of it, but I think that's one thing too is that I read this and it is very the entire like system that Ursula Kayla Guin ends up like setting up is a very utopian society, which is fine if you're reading it as fiction, which I am, but then it's also almost feels like whenever you're reading it, it's like I don't know, like, it's like the author, like, whenever you read from an author's perspective and you're reading a book from an author, you can see them insert, like, their small little tidbits, their small little biases into what you read. And I think with Ursula K. Le Guin's book, I could very much see those biases, and they were not biases that I could overlook whenever I was reading it, and so I would see certain
Yes,
things.
I don't think that you were seeing it for the whole picture of what was happening and the way that the story is structured and what message it's trying to convey. Because what was the conclusion that you ended up coming to by the end of the book? That's what I want to know. Because we have not talked. Because you just finished it like an hour
A
ago.
couple it was definitely, like, 3, 4 hours ago at this point. Well, we
Like,
can talk
what
about
did you
that.
think the overarching message
The
was?
well, the over well, I don't are we in spoilers? Because the thing is that I thought it was inherently a waste of my time. That's what I thought. I thought it was boring, and I thought I could've had a conversation with someone and gotten the same feeling that I got at the end of it. You know, I don't think it was worth reading the dryness, the boringness of, like, the lack of, like, were like, it felt very the way the writing is very flat. It's very, like sterile in, like, a way. Like, it almost feels like you're reading, like, a doctor writing something. Like, it does not feel like it's, like, a story, if that makes any sense, you know? And I think what I was looking for typically when I'm reading fiction is I'm looking for a story, and I like being able to read the story and extract my own meaning out of it instead of this where you basically I understand that, like, the idea is that, like, we should work together, or else if we can end up, like, separating and isolating ourselves from other parts of the world and other people and stuff like that, we will end up in the same, like, struggles and problems of capitalism either way, right?
Is that what you're suggesting? What are you
I'm saying that I can understand that, like, we still, like, whenever we're community based, that the idea is that we can become our own prisons and our own prisoners by making, like, even if the rules are not stated, not written down, the societal norms or the societal whatever that is put upon, whatever that's put around people, is that you can end up restricting yourself in many ways that you are restricting yourself under, like, a capitalist society, right?
I'm trying to follow what you're saying in restricting because we're still talking pretty vague. I mean, I can go through like the chapter headings because maybe like me that was too big of a question to ask for like the content of the book because I could we could talk about the themes if that
Mhm.
would be a little bit more because it's like dealing with themes of freedom, utopian ideals in both societies, humility versus moderation. The ego is a huge like presence, and then like obviously like individualism versus collectivism, and then
Mhm.
people versus the state. Ultimately, like that was like I think the people versus the state is like a huge, very obvious theme
Yes.
because it's said directly. But some of the other ideals, when we're talking about like freedoms and utopian and like the material reality of what you live, I think those were like the more interesting aspects because I can definitely see. And I look in some of the reviews, which a lot of the 1-star reviews were like anti-communist, who were like, "She's just pushing a communist agenda," and I was just
Ugh.
like, yeah, I mean, technically, yeah, like that's what
Yes.
she ends up like coming to the conclusion. Um,
Yes. I mean, you can see that with when
Interesting
are we
the
going
way
into spoilers?
yeah, I thought we were already in the spoiler.
Well,
Sorry.
I haven't said anything spoilery.
Spoiler zone. Um, I liked how the first and the last chapter are both taking place in both locations. Like I thought that was like a very full circle thing happening, right?
Okay.
One situation he's traveling to a
Mhm.
place away and then each
Traveling
chapter, I
back.
don't know if you noticed this, is that like the different chapters mirror each other.
Like, what do you
So like
mean?
chapter 2 and chapter 3, right? Between Daenerys and Ur oh my god, this is gonna be rough. Eurus, right? They're kind of exploring naivety and like being a young child and you're viewing things as like a child does,
Mhm.
like no harm could come. And then where he's viewing the capitalist society, he's seeing like the best parts of it. Right? So he's seeing
Yes.
them very naively. He's getting there's no like
He's
I don't
not
know,
seeing
nothing
the
to really challenge anyone.
homelessness, he's not seeing, like, the bad thing,
Yeah,
the
like
propaganda that Chevek has been taught his whole life, where you see whenever you get the first chapter of him on Anaris, you're getting,
yeah.
"Oh, like, they live on Uranus, it's a terrible place, everyone's starving, everyone's hungry, everyone's poor, it sucks there." And then you go to the chapter where he is there, and he's like, "Oh, this is actually really nice. They have pretty buildings, they have nice parks, they have outdoor space,
They have animals, like,
they
all of this
have
stuff that they don't have.
yeah, they can get extra dessert."
Yeah, which is, like, such a strange thing, and then, like, 4 and 5 are more about, like, the politics and insights on, like, him as a character. I do think, like, 6 and 7 kind of explore, like, his philosophy, like, growing up in one place and then his, like, lived experience in going through the other. Like, there each chapter is, like, mirroring itself throughout the entire story, and his
Okay.
character, and his growth, and his understanding of how the world functions, because he's kind of, like, going through the world thinking I don't really belong in this like utopia, and then as he like gets older he's realizing, oh wait, it's not a utopia. So then he kind of embraces cynicism, and he's kind of has this individualist mindset where he's like, I don't fit in with these people, and he thinks it's like a product of himself. He meets his wife and he's like, oh, maybe not, like I just need things that are a little bit different. But
Not
also
wife, they don't have a nuclear family
yeah,
structure.
they're yeah, that's, like, a really
Partner,
big thing. It's, like, they're, like they copulate and they decide to live in the same dormitory or
which
whatever,
is
and
frowned upon in society, which is another, like, big critique of their society that ends up being happening about separating, like, people that want to have, like, a familial connection or a partneral connection or, like, a co-inhabitant life.
yeah. Like, ultimately, like, this whole story kind of boils down to him pushing back against, like, these arbitrary binaries that he has been exposed to and like socialized in not only his society but just like the duality of both societies, and he's kind of trying to analyze the good and the bad in each one, and ultimately one society ends up winning out, and he realizes that utopian ideals are never going to exist anywhere. However, where you are in a place that prioritizes the wants and needs of the many, it is objectively better, and you should still try to strive and achieve utopianism, even if it's not tangible, because you want to do the best to rid, like society of the most
Suffering,
injustices and
yeah.
suffering. And I think that was like the overarching thing. I thought it was really brilliant how the story where Eurus is like capitalist, right? And obviously
Mhm.
there's a cold happening between like the Thu and whatnot, but still has like this perfectionist mindset where he's like, actually, where you're at is not real like
Yeah, it fucking
communism.
sucks.
I'm
Y'all
from
are garbage, yeah.
you meet somebody and they're like, "Hey, like you don't understand the material reality." And in reality, like they changed, they hyper militarized since the Odians had left. They had been bought off and got able to like just start fresh. Right? They didn't
Mhm.
have to do all of this. Like sure there was some mention of revolutionary action, but they were actually able to just
They were
up and leave.
gifted their own moon to go live on and
They like stop creating problems. So then Shivek is this symbol of revolutionary optimism for these people, because they're like he gets to talk about like brotherhood and solidarity, and like this is real, this is tangible, but you have to fight for it. And then he goes to this mass organization and realizes that like things have changed since what he knew, and I don't think he realized that a lot of this was going to happen,
mhm.
with how bad like the state has geared up. And we can see this in the United States with our hyper militarization of the police, with the military industrial complex and the prison industrial complex, the way that policing has completely changed. Like, there's a lot of parallels we can derive. And I thought that was really interesting. But he ultimately is like getting this new, like, fresh outlook, because he's like, damn, this really fucking sucks because he hit me out of hell. And I need to go back and tell
Yeah.
them, like, hey, this is right, this is wrong, and we still need to work because we don't want to accidentally fall back into those practices.
Yes, which is a fine overarching theme. Like, I think like that as well, but I don't think it was written or portrayed very well. Like, it's written like you're reading a textbook of the history almost of like like these planets, moons, whatever you want to call them. And I think that's ultimately where my problem lies, is that it was not entertaining. If I wanted to
Yeah, well,
read
it's like I think dry things like this are entertaining though, because I think it's very speculative and allows for like creativity. Because a lot of people who are like just boots on the ground revolutionaries do not take the time to think of what's going to happen, how you're going to restructure the society so it works. And I think that's a problem.
well, I
They
think the
don't. They
issue
don't look
is
out for, like,
that
the lowest members of society, you know, like, they just, like, we need to have, like, a coup d'etat, you need to have, like, armed forces and storm in, but you have to be creative and know how to, like, problem solve, and I do think stories like this can give you insight on what could be, not that you should follow it one to one, but just, like, a possibility.
well, because I think the problem is that if you do like read this and then like it can lead someone who is unprincipled to read this and then be like, "Oh, this is how we need to have our utopian communist society," sort of thing, rather than looking at it and looking at like true history of how like the thing is that it's incredibly unrealistic as well to me how you have Eurus or whatever not even trying to infiltrate on Anaris or trying to do anything to stop that whenever we know like the United States has tried to stop like socialist or communist ideals in any other country. They actively prevent it. They stage coups. They cause all of these problems to where these other states like the USSR or like the DPRK or China or anything like that has to be like hyper militarized and hyper able to fight against that. And I think that's like one thing that I have a problem with like the author and like their individual politics in that way, where they completely ignore that whenever they look at like they like the Thu or whatever is supposed to be pretty similar to like the Soviet Union and stuff like that about how they have those critiques of that whenever they don't even like they're like in the book there's no reason for the Thu in reality to be like like in like not utopian because they don't have like Eurus fighting to try to like destabilize their own government versus how we know the United States historically was acting and is acting and does act. So it makes it feel problematic because then it's almost like, oh, well, like, oh, it's like the whole libertarian thing where it's like, oh, just make your own little commune and everything will be cool and fine. We'll leave you alone. Whenever like we know objectively that is not true.
Viewed it a little bit differently. Like I viewed like their complete isolation and cutoff in the same way that other like communist projects have done, like GDR, USSR. Like they had really strict policies, and even like I know the controversial, like the DPRK is very specific about who comes in and who comes out. And I do feel like that we see in the very end of this that they are worried about things becoming oppressive, and they are amping up like their own kind of like pseudo state, even though it's like very very loose. It's not even like a proper centralized state in the
Hmm.
Eurus society, but that's like the
In the
deliberations
NR
are happening in
society,
like, yeah,
not
sorry,
Eurus.
I always get them backwards. And Eris, like the communist society, is like they're worried, and I do think that's a very valid concern because we're seeing like what's happening. They also know like the IO forces, they do have guns, they do have military, and you can see it with like the Thu and like what's happening with the other revolutionary forces. So they're kind of like we have to ensure our own people, and we just got out of like a famine.
Hmm.
So like they don't want to risk any sort of destabilizing. So I don't think it's done necessarily from um like not wanting to share, but out of just general security. And I think that's valid, and that's why it's like good to explore because it's like what do you do? What do you
Well,
do?
I mean, the thing is that like to me, it almost feels like they're like, oh, like we have this perfect society, like we are so great, and rather than actually caring about like other people or other workers that are oppressed and suffering because they are aware that that suffering is happening, they're like, well, our like it almost feels selfish in a way that they feel like their liberation is more important than other people's just because other people are not aware in the ways that they're being oppressed because they have the illusion of freedom, which is like what
But they
Shibek
also
talks
don't like
about.
have means of like they didn't have any sort of means of like talking to other people really outside of
But
like
that was
the
intentional by the
but
Anaris.
it wasn't like considered a priority. That was like a lot of like the technological innovations were reduced to whether or not it was going to be beneficial to the masses. So I'm not talking about like the Ansel that that's like the physics departments and everything being cut down because they're like, is this really necessary for our society, or Like obviously like they can't have that holistic understanding of all of the biological races because there is like the Hainish and the Terra who are like different alien bodies. It makes it difficult because there is like different planets. They are completely separate, but they're also
I
struggling. Like they don't have the adequate resources to distribute to people. Like they have to ration paper. Like they are very selective about what gets printed because they don't have the resources because they're trying to do it all themselves to be self-sufficient.
Yes, and it's like very like but then the thing is that you can see this where it's like the DPRK, again, another controversial place, or like Cuba, is that like the United States places these sanctions on them so that it's requiring them to be so like self sufficient, you know, like requiring that of Cuba to be so self sufficient. But then to sit there and like criticize like the Cuban government basically in like the dispossessed because of like the Thu like being a representative of still having a state, it's like, oh well, like Cuba is like isolated or whatever, so why don't they just go full utopian communist? Is because it's not actually realistic for a society, you know, at this point in time.
Yeah. But that's like what Shivek is getting like that reality check. Like that's what's happening as he's going through and then he realizes like I've been stuck in all these ivory towers and he meets Via who is kind of like the embodiment of like materialist like capitalism and like what you should strive for having all of these frivolous things and luxury and so he's like having this awakening and truly understanding because he is very naive. Like I can imagine being in a society in that way and then being dropped down into the United States and be like, what do you mean I gotta say like I gotta pay for things with something that doesn't make any sense, like this paper voucher? Like it is a very strange thing to be inside the head of somebody who's achieved like communism in the way that we've only read about. And I do think in what was it? I think it's
Well,
chapters
that's why I'm saying it. I don't
where
think it's
he's talking about like Kang. Like Kang, like that conversation is very relevant. I think is like one of the most important chapters in the book
You
because
mean
that's
at
supposed
the
to like
end, whenever he's talking to like the other, he's in the embassy.
yeah, where he's talking to like the person from Terra, right? And
Yeah.
Terra is essentially what Earth is going to be with the climate crisis, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Like that was pretty like self-insert and Kang is having like this capitalism realism where he's like, I've never seen anything outside of this. It is so beyond my wildest dreams and imagination. Like, what is the goodest thing? Like, I've never seen your society. I don't know anything about your society. How do I know it's even real? So she's having this like philosophical deliberation, which I think is kind of where the reader who's not principal is like, that's like the insert to like the evaluation of society and like what is the right way to move forward. And I think Shivak it has to do a really good persuasive job to convince Kang I need to go back to my society and I can show you these things, but I want to give you this tool so that you guys can all have something against the Iota because they're warmongers. They're trying to spread like interspatial like Ancapistan
Yeah. Well,
and
because I mean, like,
hold that over everyone.
but the thing is that I just don't think it. Obviously, like I understand it's a fiction book and things like that, but I just don't think it's like incredibly realistic to just be like, oh, like we can have this perfect like utopian society with no state and stuff like that, and be like this perfect place or whatever. And we obviously learn that it's not perfect, but like obviously it's
Like
closest to
that's like
what.
his chapter is where he's acknowledging that utopia is impossible. It
Well,
is not.
yes,
It's a non-possibility.
yes, but I mean more in my sense where it's like a completely like decentralized in that way where there's no like government or figurehead or like any type of like group of people that are deciding on different things, because I wonder if they did maybe end up having some type of centralized government, if there would have been more, if they could have been end up being more helpful like the Thu were to that like insurrection that was happening in that one state or whatever, you know, if they had something that was actually able to like help like guide and discuss like the people that are actually like more aware of like outside of just what an Aries is, because again like the isolation and the separation is problematic, and like it goes through those themes of that throughout the book where it's like being isolated will make you resenting of the place that you are from.
But like in my head, the isolation in it is kind of just symbolic, or be like more symbolism of the fact that you can't just have like this communism in one place. It has to be everywhere.
Yes,
You know
but
what I mean? Like so that whole like planet, and hopefully it's that's like the symbolism of that, is that it has to be all of our efforts together, and we have to actively work together. Decentralized, like, it will only work in a vacuum. I think
Mhm.
that's what it's trying to get at, is like that idea of a utopian society, completely decentralized, this anarchist, Peter Kropotkin like place. Like there would still be issues because human nature. I hate that fucking term,
Mhm.
but like it's, you know, like people are just people. People do weird things, and there's not always
Well, that's
understanding
like
for
I
it.
think
So
like
that's
that's
where in my head.
but I just don't know well because like with like well, we know that like we obviously don't know like the ins and outs of what Ursula K. Le Guin's like ideas were, but we know she was very critical of like the USSR and things like that. And to me, that's why it just feels like not necessarily problematic. It just feels like dishelpful to the movement as a whole. Where it's a lot of the times too, where at least like in my experience, like working with anarchists and things like that are fine. But then you also end up having like the anarchists that are like, well, I don't want somebody to be the boss of me, sort of ideas that they end up having, where it's like, the idea is that nobody's not really the boss of you. It's a collective. We're working together, but we do need like a state to keep the people that are not going to be a check, that are not going to do the right thing, that are do not like that are the individualistic mindset to help teach and learn and have those avenues for people to use. And I think that's like the problem with like anarchists is that they feel like so like juvenile to like authority.
Yeah. And I do think we should like acknowledge that like this is not like a communist society with a state, right? Is kind of like an oxymoron, because the idea of having a
Yes.
communist society would be what was on Anaris. Like that is like the goal to achieve. To have it
The
decentralized, to have each people be able to like manage themselves, like people being self-sufficient. But
yes.
for a permanence in a movement, to have organization, to have all that initially after a revolution has shown historically to be the way to maintain things as long as possible. And I hate that that's the way it is, but just based on what we have seen in movements like
Historically.
historically, that has been. And we should still, I do think it's of value to read a lot of this, because I think her putting those in there is kind of like where Parenti talks about how you can't just talk about like a communist society without talking about all the bad. So like people who are on the fence are like, I can't even like understand this, could read this and see like, okay, there's gonna be bad things no matter what. Like that's kind of like the self insert, like the Parenti moment from Black Shirts and Reds, where he's like the anti-communist. Like if you know, you know. Um, where but you know what I mean? Like they, especially this coming out in the 70s, right? USSR is still alive.
Mhm.
GDR I think has been dissolved at this point. So I think that's why. And also it's just like very barely out of like proper Cold War, because like
It's
Red
still
Scare
I would say
propaganda is still
yeah.
relevant. The Black Panther parties were being hunted down still actively into the 1970s. They still are like being treated horribly today. Some are still in prison. So it's like I feel like she was dancing around it. And it makes me wonder, if she was still alive today, if she were to rewrite this, what the perspective would be, knowing what she knows now.
Because I mean like historically obviously like again it's like hindsight is 2020, you know? Like you can only see what's around you and what's around you and I understand that. But then I think living in like like horrible late stage capitalism that we are in, that even just compared to like the 70s to now, like back in the 70s, yes, workers were still exploited and stuff like that, but we can still see that like regular people were still able to buy their own homes under minimum wage and things like that. Well, now under minimum wage, you can't even buy a McDonald's sandwich, you know? Like you can't do anything with minimum wage now for most states. And so I think with having like with the mindset now is that I think like if this maybe was rewritten like in 2025 and published now, then it could be significantly better, but it's just like reading it from like now with my mindset with how the world is and how we view the world, I feel like it's not necessarily a net positive or helpful necessarily to most people that are already so if they're already so like we're so deep into McCarthyism too that people will look at this and then again like you were saying where they're just like, "Oh, they're trying to spread communist propaganda," where it's like, "Yes, but then we have so many people that don't even understand what communism is. They describe capitalism when they describe the problems with communism, you know?"
Yeah. And I do think like because we do need to be critical of the things and treat them with empathy when people do have genuine concerns when they are coming from like post-Soviet countries. However, if you've read like who is it? Is it Kristen Goetze's book Why Women Have Better
Yeah.
Sex Under Socialism, when she talks about like the pronatalist policies that Stalin had implemented, like undoing a lot of the very progressive things that have been happening. There's a lot of reasons for that. Like those things were not great. They were not good for a lot of people, but no matter even at that time, it was still better than living in the West at that time. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like keeping that context. And I'm hoping now that we're having this big like reach between China, like current day China, we're seeing
Yeah.
their material on Xiaohongshu, um, and then the United States, like people are having this fourth wall break, realizing in the same way that like in this book, right, the
Yeah.
people are like, this is real, this is happening, you're seeing it on your phone, it's not AI. Like it's crazy to see like, oh, it costs $5 for them to have an ambulance, right? Whereas like
Yeah.
here it's like 5 grand. Like we're having these conversations. So I do think if you're somebody that reads a lot of like left wing theory, left wing history about like movements, you could use this as a tool to discuss these ideas. But I don't think people should just go out on a limb and read them. You know what I mean? Like you need to have some sort of backing because there is a lot of good in this, but there is some moments where it's a little like I don't know. If you don't read a lot of philosophy and stuff, I think it could very easily be like get lost in the sauce. However, I enjoy it because I read so much shit every year.
Mm-hmm. Mariah's not
I don't
picking the cream of the crop when she reads
Hey,
necessarily.
I debatable. That's debatable. But this though, I did enjoy. I think there's a lot of good to come out. Like we have to have creative solutions, and I do think people bring up genuine concerns um that we have to think outside the box. Should it always get printed in this way as a fictional novel? Absolutely not. Um but I do think this novel does a good job because as Marxists, we don't want to fall into utopian mindset and say, "Oh, this is objectively what's going to happen," but to have like a story where you be like, "Look, there's this character doing this thing." Like it feels more acceptable than to say like this is exactly what it's going to look like materially. Do you know what I mean? Because it is a fictional story.
Yeah, like it's not real. It's not gonna happen,
It's
and it
not
hasn't
real,
happened.
like,
Yeah,
but it is interesting to consider, like, oh, like we wanna like as a feminist notion, the abolition of the nuclear family is on the thing, and like, how could that work out? What is a possibility for that? Like, what could it
and that's
in
one
practice
thing
would it
too.
work out? Like, and then it shows like, oh, well, what if it didn't? What if somebody did want to have a family? Like, what? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's
Yeah,
very creative in that sense, and I don't think you should take this at face value. This has to be done in conversation with other people.
well, because like if you're reading it as just a story, you can read it as a story. I think that's fine. But I think if you're also like if you are an anarchist reading this as theory,
That is
uh
troubling.
that is scary.
Going to be honest.
Maybe actually look at like I don't know real history or something maybe. But like cuz like objectively like there is a reason why the only like true like anarchist society that we can ever reference is like revolutionary Catalonia or like the little pop-ups that happen in the United States for like a week at a time. Like it is not sustainable, especially with how like the United States functions and the United States is. Yeah, I do wish that the United States would just send all us communists off to the moon and we could live our best communist life. But in reality, like that's not something that could happen, nor is it something that will happen because like the United States care so much about power and money and greed and corporations and all of these things that they would never let something like that happen because then they're
Well, if they
losing
wanna book me
workers.
on that flight. Like,
Yeah. Like why don't we colonize Mars? You guys can have the earth. The capitalists can have the earth. Give the communists Mars and let's see who turns out better.
it is a very interesting thought experiment. Like, I've never read a book like this. Like, this is, like, a more elevated version of like, I feel like this is, like, on, like, the literature scale, right? That I've learned about, like, Chinese publishing. You would have, like, the Dispossessed would be, like, on the furthest end where it's, like, super philosophical and speculative, and then, like, maybe Babel would be, like, sitting somewhere in the middle, and then, I don't know, like, The Will of the Many would be on, like, the
What?
further because it's not like I don't the way like different societies view like literature. Like this is like a deeply political book, so like this is not going to be something that's for everyone. So that's all I'm trying to get at. I
And
was
the
like, it's
problem,
not as like because there's no
I mean,
like plot like things happening in the way like traditional like American novels are. So if you like that type of vibe, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that.
if you made it this far, you probably have already read the book. So, but I don't think it's something that you can necessarily like wholeheartedly recommend to most people because again, it's like one of those books where it's like it's entertaining if you're a fucking nerd.
Okay, I'm all right with that because I do think this is like I'm curious how this compares to the three body problem, which I had just gotten recommended, and it looks because it's science fiction and it seems to have some similar themes. How it compares because it's very popular in China, so I'm curious how they treat it. If it's like their version of the Dispossessed, I don't know
I don't
though.
know. I just
I
saw
oh,
that there's a
if I had
Netflix
to
show.
like pick though, if somebody had to pick between reading this or reading Animal Farm though, this is objective. This is what
Well,
George Orwell
yes.
would have wanted because George Orwell is a dog shit writer, and I'm the Chinese translation must be significantly better. That's the
Oh yeah,
only
because
thing.
everybody is reading it there. I swear to
It,
God, I
the
just see that
copies are
stupid
beautiful.
eyeball cover. I'm like, get that shit out of here. The
They
stupid
love
like
it. I think it's so
1984.
interesting. Yeah. So I don't know, but I think that's basically it. Those are all the thoughts I had. I just thought it is very interesting. The like structure. If you like, I can see people calling this like pretentious, but I also have been told by somebody. I don't know which direction you're at
I,
on
I
your screen.
I'm to your left, I think.
Yeah, not for everyone. I enjoyed it. I think it's fun to talk about.
And I'm also not the only person that didn't like it either. Somebody else in the book club did DNF it at chapter 6, and I wish I was them.
Yeah, this is something that Kristen would have DNF'd. It's just very strange, like when you go from reading what revolutionaries are written like in a lot of novels now from like liberal authors, and they're
Well, it's
depicted
not
as being
even.
terrorists. And this was so nice to actually have the language that we read about in our theory in a fictional novel that's considered a classic. Like that never happens.
Well, yes, that's true. But I also just. Maybe if they wanted it to be. I don't know. Maybe it should have been written more entertaining. It's just written like so like technical. It's like I really cannot get over the writing style at all. Which I'm hoping.
And this is going to be more fun because if the politics are similar, right? At least just in like the class dynamic, I think you're going to eat up the Earthsea because I started it and I was like, this kind of reminds me of like
Because
Grishaverse.
I think my problem was with like the dispossess. It's so like there's no flavor.
I want to read this because a lot of people said that they loved this, but then they went to read that and there was no plot, so they hated it because it was just all character. But this was like all
Yeah,
plot.
that's definitely more my speed, which I'd be more interested in checking that out. But like the thing, it's just I wish because like I gave it 2.75, which like to most people, yeah, that's a bad score, whatever. But it's like almost a 3 star, it's like almost mid. It's just like not quite even mid.
Yeah, in the scheme of Kristen rating, this is not the worst book. I
No, but
think if
it's
it had a more of a plot, you probably would have enjoyed it a lot more. And
or
I
even
don't think that's wrong.
I think if it was maybe even not even like following like Chevek's character, I think if it was following like the like whatever people like the original Udonians and like them like doing their thing and then getting sent off to the moon or whatever, I think that would have been a more compelling story to me than reading about someone that's like, oh, I live in this epic poggers place, basically, where it's like,
Kristen is just a hater because Kristen is jealous. That was
I
literally
was
all
like,
boiled
let
down.
me
Just like
go
I will
to
take
Ancapistan
me.
and suffer, and then oh my god, Ancapistan is actually like hell on earth. Who would have thought? And it's
I'm
like,
curious though because I did read that some of the terms because on that one like I read some summaries and theories on just like the ideas of like oh the ship could be this or the wall could be this, but I don't think it's I'm not we're not doing that. That's not what we do.
The ship could be this. What?
Yeah, like the ship is like symbolic of like Shivek's transformation and transcending. Like there's a lot of like theories around whatever. But the Anisable, like his theory, what it gets turned into, are relevant in the later Hainish cycle thing. So I don't know what
Oh.
that means for the other people or what the. So I'm assuming the books before it happened before this, like
Like, yeah.
chronologically in like the Hainish cycle series. So I'm curious because there is like an Odo's like Revolution, but it's a very short read.
Yeah, it's
I
like
might
30
read
pages.
more. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I might just leave it at this for now because it is a lot, but it's
Yeah.
not one of those things you could binge it, but I don't think you'd get enough out of it if you did binge it that way. It would.
It's definitely, I mean, I
The
think
book
it was,
girlies are not gonna like this. They would not eat it up. This is not Akatar or Fourth Wing.
no, but I mean, like, it's fine. Like, objectively, it's like fine. It's just like not something that I would be drawn to like read anything like objectively like similar to it either. Like, I think if the writing was maybe a little bit more animated too, because it's like all written so matter of factly. I think is like, and whenever everything is like written, like it's like I
It
wanted it
does
to
read like a classic. I can see that, like, where it's kind of, like, devoid of
like,
emotions that way,
yeah.
where, like, you get a little bit, but it's still not something that, like, everyone's
It's
searching
like
for.
something you have to project yourself, and like whenever I'm like the way that I'm a reader is that I like the author spelling it out for me. I don't know if it's like the autism or what, but I like getting every single little emotion. I like the feet kicking, the butterflies, like all of that. And it was just so like devoid of that. Like it was a lot of
Mhm.
just like Shavek
Well, 'cause
got with his
even
partner. Shavek copulated. Shavek had his kid.
what is romance though, like, in, like, Western capitalist society, and I think it was supposed to be, like, more commentary on that, like, how it could look a little bit differently and be more paired with people who are, like, ideologically on the same plane as you, and if it didn't work out, it's not necessarily a moralizing thing or an awkward thing, it just didn't. Like, so, like, it
No,
wouldn't
but I
be,
don't
like,
think
romancing and swooning somebody because you aren't a possession, you're just two autonomous beings coming together.
and like
You know what I
choosing
mean?
to be again. Yes, but I think like the choice of being together is such an important thing for like choosing your life partner. Because the thing is that like there obviously was some type of like romance there between Tack Takever, I don't know how the fuck to
Mhm.
say her name, and Shavek, because like they were like craving to be around each other, you know, because like
Mm.
whenever Shavek got shipped off, he was like, fuck, I miss my family. And then she got sent off and he's like, fuck, I miss my family, you know? And it's like
Yeah.
so like the
Well, and that's,
feelings
like,
of longing are there.
his missing piece. It was just, like, he needed for him, he needed that, which was very different from other society, you know, like,
Yes,
that
but like is it different from society because you even get that scene with what's his face? Beldap or whatever. And he's like, whenever his daughter starts crying, she's like, "Don't send me back there because like they fucking hate me there because you suck, dad," or whatever. And then like he just like the dude walks away and he's kind of like bummed out. He's like, "Damn, I don't have a family. This sucks." So it's like obviously like in this society there is some type of like partnership or it's not like that like people do not want to be alone, you know? And I think like
yeah, but it's
even
just, like, ridding yourself I think if you can rid yourself of the understanding that your partner is your partner and not possession and property, like, you don't own them and their decisions. It's different. Like, I know, like, Huey P. Newton kinda talked about how his relationship practices were very similar to this, like, where you'd be with somebody for a while, and then sometimes if like, it was more like open relationships, but not I don't know, it's very hard to think about because it's so different than how relationships function.
I mean, it's obviously like people's personal preferences too. Like some people can be
Yeah.
just fine with like being very disconnected from their partner, like them living their own life. But I know, like me personally, like with my partner, uh, the decisions we do everything together. I could not like where she's like, "Oh, like Chevette, go off to Eurus or whatever. That's what you want to do," and he's like, "No, I don't." And she's like, "Yes, you do." And it's like, I'd be like, "Take me with you. I'm not going by myself. Hello."
It's interesting. I'll have to
And
read the
even
other, like,
Chevette
the
didn't want
feminist one to see.
because like Chevette didn't even want to. go off by himself either, because he was like, he like had that thing where he was talking to that lady or whatever, and he was like, oh, like I would have brought my partner, like if I could have, and it's like they don't have those means because of the way that their society is, and it's like obviously that doesn't work for everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what it was highlighting is there's not going to be like a homogenous, like one size fit all answer to
But I don't
problems.
think
That's
people
not a
think like
problem.
that either. I mean, maybe the anarchists do. I don't know. They got their
Yeah,
own things going on.
it's certainly we don't. But I
Not
think
me.
that was we covered pretty much everything. I don't know if you have anything else you want.
No, I don't think so. Not that I have to say. Okay,
If
well,
you want to read along with us next month, we're going to be starting up at the very beginning of the month. We have a book set aside. It will get announced on our book club. We're not going to put it here because I think
oh,
that would take away
team.
from the book club. So it'll be drama. So if you want to join,
And that'll
go to
be our
fable.com. Lit Lib Pod is the book club name.
on Fable. And the episode, I think, will end up going up, on the 27th of February? So, if you want to see early thoughts, early anything like that, the book club, I'm much more hopeful about this read. This is something that I think, because I don't think I really picked the Dispossessed. I feel like it was shoved onto me. I'm not gonna lie. Um, but
But
I
this
think
one we picked out.
this one, I think I had a lot more, because I had different suggestions for what we were reading, and then it ended up winning the poll, so it had to go. But this month we did pick something, so something that I've had on my TBR for a while. But other than that, next episode will be on The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Beginning of February-ish, I think, is whenever it'll come out.
Sounds right to me.
Anyways,
Yeah.
follow us
Thanks
on
for
all of our
listening
social
or
medias.
watching.
Yeah. Other than that, I think that's it. Thank you and good night.